part 3 of our availability management video series, we're going to go over the process of manual editing of allocations. And this is really where the user comes into play in terms of getting that last level of accuracy in the reporting of availability and the auditing of that availability number. We talked about in the previous videos how allocations are generated and how you can configure event templates and the availability of the system to replicate any contract or any use case you need it to be. In this video, we're going to go over the type of common edits that you'll typically make and then demonstrate the editing process live in the portal. Just to remind you of the process of availability management, the blue box is largely the automated process where the system will read in alarms, events, operational states, and process data to trigger, change, and create allocations. Users then will be able to review these allocations, change the metadata about these allocations to add any color commentary, change the classifications, etc. And they do this specifically in the allocations menu or the availability timeline tool. Why is this needed? Well, allocations are never going to be 100% accurate. Why? Well, there could be data loss. There could be data delay. Let's say alarms are perhaps delayed reading into Bazefield because your SCADA system hasn't been upgraded in 12 years. There could be a large influx of alarms of events that happen at the same time, and maybe our system doesn't exactly pick out the right one that was the true root cause of the allocation. Or maybe your rules and your triggers that you've set up are not working perfectly, and you might need to tweak those. So allocations are never 100% accurate. We shoot for around 95 to 98% accuracy because we don't want to make users spend hours and hours a week editing allocations. We want the users to only edit the largest allocations to make sure that those are accurate and add the real value to those allocations as opposed to going through every second of operation for every single asset. That's just not feasible. So in this demonstration now, we're going to go over a few different types of editing and when and where you'd use those types in real-world use cases. Okay, in the portal, we want to get started managing our availability, managing our allocations. We go right to the availability tool, and that will load the allocations, which is one of the screens that we use to do management of allocations. So again, it's embedded with our filter, so I don't like to load up more than, let's say, a week or a month of allocations at a time. And let's say I just want to look at a certain site and hit apply. You can see I'm looking at the a wind site. We'll quickly look at a solar site too. So wind site has alarms, events, and then all the allocation categories that are associated with it. Similar if you want to do availability management for solar. Same concept. The only thing that you might need to do is, instead of wind categorizations, you want to go down to your inverter categorizations because obviously those are different notation, different types of categories. So yeah. So point is, you do this for both wind and solar, right? I'm going to go back to my wind farm real quick because it has a little bit more interesting use cases for availability management sometimes. So go back and include my wind categorizations here, have them load up. Okay, so when you're on the screen, every line item is an allocation. It's a period of time described by one or a set of categories with the root cause events, which was grouped to this allocation shown here. So this is basically saying the trigger system and the rule system went through the logic, chose this pitch control deviation as the cause of a new allocation to be generated, and the classifications according to our domain model of this 340 pitch control deviation were these, okay? You can see though, there could be a one-off scenario where you might need to change the categories for a certain event. So let's take this 157 secondary rotor brake does not close. In general, yeah, this is associated with the braking system, right? But let's say, for example, for whatever reason, this was not caused by really the brake. This was more of a control system error. I can choose control system and then even choose a subgroup of the control system through my subclassing here. So when I hit save, you can see now that there's been a black bar that's been chosen here. This lets you know that there's been a manual edit done to the default Bazefield allocation. So this is an important visual indicator that you have. Other things you can do, let's say this 157 was not truly the cause of this event. I can drill into my events, and anything highlighted in red basically is an event or an alarm that occurred during this allocation. So I wanted to maybe attribute this to the manual idle stop instead. So I'm going to say set cause and hit OK. And that will change the allocation root cause to this manual idle stop. So two main things to do for allocations: changing categories, changing alarms. Those are the two, I would say, the two primary things you can do. Other things that are kind of secondary is technically you can change time period. I don't necessarily advise doing this. If you're seeing that allocations aren't correct in terms of their time period, it's probably because the triggering and the rules need to be tweaked slightly. So I don't like telling customers and users of Bazefield to really change time periods. I think that can be a little bit dangerous. You can also add labels to allocations though as well. And labels are like a kind of subcategory set. So if you didn't want to change the categories, but you just wanted to add a label of some sort, let's say you wanted to give a gearbox label to this, just choose gearbox and hit save. So now I've given a little gearbox label to this allocation. And you'll see in the next video, the allocation statistics, the importance that these labels can play in rolling up your lost megawatt hours and lost time within a label. Okay, so labels, categories, alarms are the main ones, but you can also add comments, just like in asset operations. You can, ongoing maintenance or ongoing investigation, and you can attach this comment to this allocation, and that will basically show right under here. You can even add tasks. So we went over tasks in the asset operation in video series 2, but you can add a task for a historical or a previous allocation. The cool part here too is if you want to add a task, so let's say this manual idle stop, and you add a certain task, when you have a new event that is also a manual idle stop, the previous tasks that you have done during manual idle stops will show up as suggestions to do. So the system will tell you even potential suggestions of what tasks to perform for certain allocations based on linking the task with the alarm from a previous instance or from a previous asset. Other things I like to do if I'm doing editing is, if you just drill into this allocation, you can go to the trend tool and you can see like the real-time, let's say, wind speed or irradiance for solar, and also the active power. So you can verify when this allocation ended in gray that the active power came back on. So this is a good way you can really verify if this was truly a stop or truly a performance or a full performance state. Now this is all grand, and you can do all this in bulk too. You can do things and do bulk operations. Let's say you want to change the category sets of all three of these to be the same. You can do that as a one-off. But you might want to do this in a more visual fashion, right? This can be a little bit overwhelming. So I'm going to choose just this site, and I'm going to choose the last week. Instead of looking at things from a line item perspective, I want to get a nice visual Gantt chart of all my allocations in one clean view. So what you're going to see here is all the timeline show up on the x-axis, and you're going to show all the assets of a turbine type in this site show up on the y-axis. And the allocations then show up based on the color that you've configured in your allocation type manager, which we showed in the previous video. So you can see a lot of red here, a lot of forced outages. You can see dark red, these are the repairs and maintenances. But you can see when we configure the rules and the triggers, we do so to try and get all these automatically correct. So in this case, there was a forced outage, a pitch communications fault, which then switched to a repair or maintenance. And that's because we, in our wind model, or one of our rules says, if you have a fault, but then a maintenance come in, automatically switch it, so you don't have to edit this scenario. But let's say you wanted to edit this. I wanted just one allocation now. I double click that, and it takes me to an asset view of just that machine, and a Gantt chart of just that machine, right? So here, let's say I wanted to manage this now individually. I can do it just from this screen. I can even split the allocations. I can merge them together. I can do kind of whatever I see fit here. Hit show available. Show available too is I can show when I click that, basically by default, usually the system will only show things that count against machine availability, but you're going to have a lot of states, like let's say a low wind state where the machine's not producing just because the wind speed's low. That's an available category. It doesn't count against your availability, but sometimes you want to look at it in your Gantt chart. But yeah, you can see the split, the merge, so you can merge adjacent ones. If I wanted to split this one, I just hit split, and that will create two allocations then in the middle now, and now I can individually reallocate those to be whatever I need them to be. And the good part is about this is we have undo buttons. So if you want to kind of get rid of any change that has been made, if you messed up or you wanted to change somebody's work that screwed up the system, you can undo, and you can see it goes back to one allocation. Okay, getting back into one really important use case, let's go back to the timeline. Kind of showed you how to split allocations, how to individually reallocate categories. But in the case for large events that happen, let's say the grid goes down, or there's a big curtailment that affects all the assets at one time, we have the notion of bulk events. And this basically changes all the machines and all the categories at once. So again, I'm looking at my entire site here. You know, I can see some low wind time, I can see some downtime, different types of stops showing up in my different color categories. But let's say, I'm just going to try to find, oh, here's maybe an interesting example. You can see I have these periods here where it looks like the machine is being stop and started curtailed, right? And maybe I just want to evenly call this entire chunk of period for all the machines one big curtailment. And I don't want to have to individually click all these guys, individually reclassify all of them. So I'm going to add a bulk event. Now, when a bulk event, you need to give a time frame. So when I click one of these, it will have the time frame automatically populated. But I'm going to back out and choose about 7 a.m. to about, looks like 1 p.m. or 1300 hours. And I can give it an event type. We'll call this a curtailment shutdown. But there's different types of bulk event outages we have preloaded in the system. These are customizable, so these don't have to be these exact ones, but these are generic to describe power plant events of different magnitudes. And I'm going to say, I want to march through this period of time. I'm going to give it a curtailment shutdown, and I want to just merge all these allocations into one big curtailment chunk. And I'm going to give the individual turbine classifications to be the required ones needed to describe this outage. So a curtailment, for example, for GADS is let's call it an economic curtailment, and let's give an external stop time for the contractual GE allocation. I can say maybe this is an ERCOT site. All right, so I've given the system all the information it needs. I'm gonna hit add. Give me a little warning that says, hey, you're about to change a lot of allocations. So I'm gonna hit okay. I'm okay with that. From there, the system's gonna then go from 700 hours to 1300 hours and create one big bulk event across all these machines, no matter what else is there. What it needs to do then is basically split the time on the left and right. So even you'll see this allocation here is going to be split into three, a beginning, a middle, and an end, because we need that bulk event to intersect it and cut through that individual event. So you can see when that bulk event has now marched through, it will give me a little indication that the event has been saved successfully. It will then reload all that Gantt chart data back in my view, and I'll be able to see and verify that that bulk event has been created and the change in categories that has occurred. So here we go. There's the bulk event. You can see the left and the right have now even the manual indication, because technically we've split those two allocations and changed the time period for them. So technically we edited those. But you can see I created one big chunk of allocation, and all classified under the same category, just with one go, as opposed to trying to do it, for every single little machine. So that's just a primer on event editing, some of the important features of it. I think bulk editing is very important to manage site events, but also one-off events through your allocations tool. This is a primer before your availability statistics video, which will be coming up next.